Tonight, the deadline is closing in fast and the pressure is building around Donald Trump as he faces one of the most financially and politically intense moments of his career. The clock is ticking toward a critical requirement, securing a massive $464 million bond tied to the civil fraud judgment against him in New York. And now, for the first time, authorities are no longer just warning about consequences. They are beginning to act. Tonight, the situation has entered a new phase. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, has officially taken initial legal steps that could lead to the seizure of Trump's assets if he fails to meet the looming deadline. This is no longer hypothetical. This is real movement, real documentation, and real preparation for enforcement. According to filings made by the Attorney General's office, groundwork is now being laid to potentially take control of key Trump properties. Among them, a high-profile golf course and estate located in Westchester County, one of the more valuable and symbolic assets in Trump's real estate portfolio. These are not minor holdings. These are cornerstone properties tied directly to his brand and identity. At the same time, Trump's legal team is signaling distress. His lawyers are openly stating that securing such a bond has proven to be extraordinarily difficult, nearly impossible under current conditions, and the numbers tell a story that is hard to ignore. Reports indicate that around 30 insurance companies have already refused to back the bond. The reasoning is consistent across the board: insufficient liquid cash and an unwillingness to accept real estate assets as collateral. That last part is crucial because while Trump is known for owning vast amounts of property, lenders and insurers are looking for cash or highly liquid assets, not buildings, not golf courses, not branded towers. And without that liquidity, the pathway to securing the bond becomes extremely narrow. Trump himself has pushed back strongly, arguing that the Attorney General's actions are designed to force him into a corner. He claims this is an attempt to pressure him into selling his real estate holdings at what he describes as fire sale prices, far below their actual value. And he raises a key point from his perspective. If he ultimately wins his appeal, those assets could already be gone, sold off under pressure, and potentially impossible to recover. That argument introduces a deeper layer to this entire situation, one that blends legal risk with political narrative. Because while this case is rooted in financial law, the implications stretch far beyond dollars and cents. And then in the middle of all of this, something else happened, something that caught attention for a completely different reason. Donald Trump stood before members of his own party and said something that many politicians would never say out loud. He warned them directly. If Republicans lose the midterm elections, he believes impeachment will follow. Now, what made that moment stand out wasn't just the statement itself. It was the tone. It wasn't framed as speculation. It wasn't presented as a distant possibility. It sounded calculated, almost expected, as if he had already mapped out the political consequences in his mind. That's where things begin to shift from simple reporting into deeper analysis. Because most politicians, when facing pressure project confidence, they emphasize strength, momentum, and inevitability of victory. But this sounded different. This sounded like someone thinking several moves ahead, not just about winning, but about what happens if they don't. To fully understand the weight of that statement, it's important to step back and look at the broader context, especially how impeachment actually works in the United States. There's a common misconception that impeachment automatically removes a president from power. That's not how the system is designed. Impeachment begins in the House of Representatives, where lawmakers vote on formal charges. In simple terms, it's similar to an indictment, an official accusation. But removal from office is a completely separate step. That process takes place in the Senate, and it requires a 2/3 majority vote, 67 senators, to convict and remove a president. Historically, that threshold is extremely difficult to reach. And Donald Trump is no stranger to this process. He has already been impeached twice in the past. The first instance was tied to his dealings with Ukraine. The second followed the events surrounding January 6th. In both cases, the House voted to impeach him. In both cases, the Senate did not reach the necessary votes to convict, so technically, he survived both attempts. But survival doesn't erase the underlying political reality. It simply means that at that moment in time, the votes weren't there. And in politics, numbers can change. That's the key point. When Trump says that losing the midterms could lead to impeachment, he's not making a legal argument. He's making a political calculation. He's looking at the balance of power in Congress. Who controls the House? Who controls committees? and who has the authority to initiate proceedings, because if that balance shifts, the entire landscape changes. From his perspective, that risk is real. Now, depending on where you stand politically, interpretations of all this vary dramatically. Supporters of Trump often argue that previous impeachment efforts were politically motivated, using terms like weaponization or lawfare to describe what they see as unfair targeting. Critics, on the other hand, argue that those actions were based on legitimate concerns about conduct and accountability. And that divide is at the heart of the tension. This is no longer just about one legal case or one political statement. It's about years of ongoing conflict between legal institutions, political strategy, and public perception. Then comes another major element, the legal investigations themselves. Special counsel Jack Smith has played a central role in several high-profile investigations connected to Trump. Recently, he appeared before the House Judiciary Committee for a closed-door deposition. While the full transcript has not been released publicly, portions of his opening remarks have surfaced, and those remarks added even more intensity to the situation. According to available information, Smith indicated that his team believes they have gathered evidence that meets the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt in cases related to the 2020 election and the handling of classified documents. That is a significant statement. It doesn't mean a conviction is guaranteed. It doesn't mean the process is complete, but it does signal a high level of confidence from investigators regarding the strength of their case. As expected, reactions were immediate and deeply divided. Some lawmakers, particularly Republicans aligned with Trump, strongly criticized the investigation, questioning its motives, timing, and whether political bias played a role. Others defended it, arguing that the legal system must operate independently regardless of who is involved. And once again, the same pattern emerges. Two completely different interpretations of the same set of events. That's why this situation feels so complex, because it's not just one story. It's multiple layers unfolding at the same time. Legal battles, political strategy, media narratives, and public opinion are all intersecting. And then there's timing. An often overlooked but critical factor. Elections change incentives. That's a fundamental reality of politics. Lawmakers, especially those facing re-election, constantly evaluate what actions will help or hurt their chances with voters. Every decision is influenced, at least in part, by political survival. So when Trump connects impeachment to election outcomes, he's acknowledging that reality. If control of Congress changes, priorities can shift. Actions that were unlikely before can suddenly become possible. And that leads to another important layer, the question of legal accountability for a sitting president. There has long been a Department of Justice policy suggesting that a sitting president should not be indicted based on concerns about interfering with the executive branch. However, that is a policy, not a permanent legal shield. Once a president is no longer in office, that dynamic changes. And that's why elections carry such high stakes in this context. They're not just about policy direction. They're about what happens afterward. Which investigations move forward, which cases gain momentum, and what actions lawmakers choose to pursue. In that light, Trump's statement starts to look less like a simple comment and more like a window into how he views the entire situation. It's direct, it's unfiltered, and it reveals a level of strategic thinking that goes beyond typical campaign messaging. Now, does that mean impeachment will definitely happen if political power shifts? Not necessarily. Politics is unpredictable. Public opinion can change. Unexpected events can reshape the landscape overnight. And even when conditions seem aligned, outcomes are never guaranteed. But what it does show is how high the stakes feel right now. Not just for Trump, but for everyone involved. Because whether someone supports him or opposes him, there is a shared understanding that these are not routine political moments. These are consequential turning points. They determine who holds power. They influence what actions are possible, and they shape how ongoing legal and political battles unfold in the months and years ahead. And sometimes the most revealing moments are not the carefully prepared speeches or polished statements. They're the unscripted comments, the moments when strategy becomes visible, when concerns slip through, and when calculations are laid bare. That's what made this moment stand out. Because when a figure at that level starts talking about impeachment, not as a distant possibility, but as something expected under certain conditions, it changes how people interpret everything else that follows. It shifts the conversation. It reframes the stakes and it forces everyone, supporters, critics, and observers alike, to start thinking more seriously about what comes next. If you found this breakdown useful, stay connected for more in-depth analysis. As this story continues to develop, and as this story continues to unfold, the next phase could arrive faster than many expect, because once deadlines pass and legal thresholds are crossed, the process tends to accelerate. What starts as paperwork can quickly turn into enforcement. What begins as a warning can evolve into action. If Donald Trump is unable to secure that bond in time, the Attorney General's office will have the authority to move forward more aggressively. That could mean placing liens on properties, freezing certain assets, or initiating steps to seize and potentially sell holdings tied to the judgment. And when that happens, the situation shifts from a legal battle into a visible financial event, something the public can actually see playing out in real time. Think about what that would look like. Properties that have long been associated with Trump's name, buildings, golf courses, estates, suddenly becoming part of a legal recovery process. That's not just a courtroom story anymore. That becomes a headline-driven, highly visual moment that reinforces the seriousness of the case. At the same time, Trump's legal team is not standing still. They are actively pursuing appeals trying to challenge the size of the judgment and the conditions surrounding the bond requirement. Their argument centers on fairness, claiming that the scale of the bond is excessive and that the limitations placed on acceptable collateral make it nearly impossible to comply. But courts tend to operate on strict standards when it comes to financial judgments. The requirement for a bond is designed to ensure that funds will be available if the appeal fails. It's not meant to be convenient, it's meant to be secure. And that's where the tension lies. Because from Trump's perspective, this isn't just about meeting a requirement. It's about navigating a system that he believes is stacked against him. From the state's perspective, it's about enforcing a lawful judgment and ensuring accountability. Those two viewpoints are fundamentally at odds, and neither side is backing down. Now layer that onto the political environment, and the complexity increases even further, because every legal development is now being interpreted through a political lens. Every court filing becomes a talking point. Every statement becomes part of a larger narrative. Supporters see resilience and resistance. Critics see consequences and accountability. And in the middle of all of that, there's the reality of timing once again. The closer this gets to major election cycles, the more amplified everything becomes. Media coverage intensifies, public reactions grow stronger, and political figures on both sides use these moments to reinforce their broader messages. But there's another dimension that often gets overlooked: the impact on Trump's broader business operations. Even outside of politics, situations like this can create ripple effects. Lenders become cautious, partners reassess risk. Ongoing projects may face uncertainty, because when assets are potentially at risk, it introduces a level of instability that extends beyond a single case. And yet, despite all of this pressure, Trump continues to project defiance. Publicly, he maintains that he has substantial wealth, strong businesses, and the ability to withstand these challenges. That messaging is consistent with his long-standing personal brand, one built on strength, success, and control. But the contrast between messaging and legal reality is becoming harder to ignore. Because while statements can shape perception, deadlines operate independently of narrative. And right now, the deadline is one of the most important factors in this entire story. If the bond is secured at the last moment, it buys time. It pauses enforcement. It allows the appeals process to move forward without immediate asset risk. But if it isn't secured, the consequences begin almost immediately. That's why this moment feels so critical. It's not just another development in a long-gunning saga. It's a potential turning point. And at the same time, the political implications continue to evolve. Trump's earlier comments about impeachment weren't made in isolation. They connect directly to the broader question of power: who holds it, how it's used, and what actions become possible depending on election outcomes. If political control shifts, investigative priorities can shift with it. Congressional committees can change direction. Oversight efforts can expand or contract, and the willingness to pursue certain actions, including impeachment, can increase or decrease accordingly. That's not speculation. That's how the system is structured, and it's why elections in this context carry a different kind of weight. They're not just about policy debates or campaign promises. They're about the framework within which all of these legal and political processes unfold. So when Trump speaks openly about impeachment as a potential consequence, he's acknowledging that framework. He's signaling that he understands how interconnected these dynamics are. And for observers, that creates a moment of clarity because it reveals not just what is happening, but how it's being interpreted by the people directly involved. Now, whether those interpretations prove accurate is another question entirely. Politics has a way of defying expectations. Situations that seem inevitable can stall. Outcomes that seem unlikely can suddenly become reality. But what cannot be ignored is the intensity of this moment. You have a former president facing a massive financial judgment, struggling to secure a bond under tight deadlines while simultaneously navigating ongoing legal investigations and a politically charged environment. Each of those factors alone would be significant. Together, they create a situation that is almost unprecedented in modern American politics. And as this continues to develop, the next moves, both legal and political, will be critical. Will the bond be secured in time? Will enforcement actions begin? How will courts respond to ongoing appeals? And how will all of this influence the broader political landscape moving forward? Those are the questions that remain unanswered. But one thing is clear: the next few days, not weeks, not months, but days, could play a decisive role in shaping what happens next. Because when deadlines collide with legal authority and political stakes, outcomes tend to come quickly. And once they do, they're often difficult to reverse. So now all eyes remain on what happens next, because this isn't slowing down. If anything, it's just getting started.